This is ABC News Nightline. Reporting from Washington, Ted Koppel.
Joining us in our Washington bureau is Phil Klass, an editor with Aviation Week magazine
and a founder of PsyCop, the Committee for the
Scientific Investigation of Claims of the Paranormal, a group which checks out claims of UFO sightings. Also here in Washington is Stanton Friedman, a physicist who's been involved in nuclear space and research for such companies as General Electric, Westinghouse, and General Motors. He has studied and lectured on UFOs for almost 30 years and is in Washington this week taking part in the International Symposium of the Mutual UFO Network. Mr. Friedman, there are books, there are magazine articles, there are television interview programs which have very little time, such as this one. Give it your best shot. If you are seeking to convince the skeptical, what do you point to?
I'm seeking to convince the healthy agnostics. The skeptics don't want to listen to the data in my findings. I point to the 2,400 plus landing trace cases, physical changes in the environment, collected from 65 countries.
He sure did. In fact, just last month on this channel, we reviewed the 1971 UFO ring at Delphos, Kansas.
I point to the 3,200 cases in Project Blue Book Special Report 14, 20% of which couldn't be explained, and at all the characteristics we attribute to flying saucers.
At conferences around the world, Stan Friedman rightfully lamented that far too few humans had actually read and retained the information in Special Report 14. True, the document is over 300 pages long, but it's easy to get to the key page that undermines the executive summary that has filtered away many earthbound dum-dums.
I point to the 3,500 pilot sightings collected by a NASA scientist on the West Coast. I point to Bud Hopkins' 140 abductees with a waiting list of 200, and an enormous amount of data in the form of documents, some of them obtained from the government directly, some not so directly, clearly indicating that our planet is being visited, that some UFOs are alien spacecraft, and that we are indeed dealing with a cosmic Watergate. For example, I also point to the 92 different witnesses that William Moore and I have talked to about the Roswell incident that was described briefly in the early piece on the program.
I'll tell you what, let me make it a little tougher for you. Instead of all these pieces of evidence to which you're referring, refer to one concrete, substantive, visible piece of evidence that exists somewhere, something that we can look at, touch, feel.
Stan Friedman will give a fairly good reply to Ted Koppel's question. He fails, however, to mention the recently departed J. Allen Hynek supported Dorothy Izod and her thousands of feet of 8mm film footage as something credible, physical, and tangible.
I think you've asked the wrong question. By the nature of the beast, the pieces that were picked up at Roswell, for example, which are described in the document that was alluded to earlier, are not available for your viewing or my viewing. They clearly are top secret, eyes only, something above that.
Understand, but for example, the abductees, and you say there are how many of them now? 100
There are but over 120 of those.
Now, none of them has come back with anything except memories.
That seems to be the case. They also come back with descriptions of writing. 5 of those looked at independently. None of those had any way of knowing what the other people had drawn from what they claimed to have seen. So we have duplication that seems to pass any notion of randomness that would be attributable to phony stories, if you will.
Mr. Klass, what about all right, 5 people who come back make approximate sketches of something that they claim to have seen? Presumably they have not had contact with one another? I don't know.
Ted, they're as identical as you and I are. I would wish that we were as identical.
Given the example of the biodiversity of animal life on planet Earth alone, Klass's statement is really not helpful to his argument.
Let me respond, if I may, to an issue that's come up here that I think is a very important one. These alleged top-secret, eyes-only documents provide ABC, provide the nation, an opportunity to find out for themselves firsthand what sort of nonsense the UFO proponents are spouting. I would suggest the following. If ABC thinks there's even 1%, even a 1% chance that those documents are authentic, launch an all-out effort. Go to the president of ABC, ask for 50 of your best investigative journalists, and within a month come back and report either these documents are authentic, we have captured a flying saucer, the government has maintained a cover-up for 40 years, or come back and report it's nonsense and there has never been so great a con job done against the news media and the public as has been perpetrated with the release of these phony documents.
This is a reference to the Majestic 12 documents, labeled as bogus by the FBI but aggressively defended in detail by Stanton, Friedman, and a few others. The topic requires a separate video to responsibly address for any new entrants to the field.
Phony documents.
Mr. Klass, on the one hand, you know, you've been a journalist for a long time yourself, that it's not quite as easy as that, but on the other hand, I would take part of what you have said and pose this question to Mr. Friedman. I don't know how familiar you are with Washington. I'm very familiar with Washington, and I know that it is almost impossible to keep a story of that sort of dimension without some leak or another filtering out from some part of the bureaucracy or the government establishment over a period of 40 days, let alone 40 years.
Ted, let me comment about that. One thing I am familiar with is I worked on classified programs for 15 years. I had a high-level security clearance. And essentially everybody I've talked to who also has had high-level security clearances agrees fully with the notion that secrets are being kept, that there are dozens, if not hundreds, of so-called black programs. Impressed with Washington's efforts with regards to UFOs, but let's face it, there have been loads of leaks. Many of the stories, the whole work on Roswell came from people who were talking about the pieces of information that they have been aware of. Leaks are all over the place. Willingness to follow up on the leaks is quite another story. I think that the people who want to keep secrets have done a very good job of taking advantage of the egos of the Washington press corps who think that no secrets can be kept from them.
Stanton and his associates have, I think, done the nation a service by making public these documents. And now we can see what the news media of this country, how they evaluate them. As I say, if ABC, if the New York Times, the Washington Post think there's even 1% chance that they're authentic, they ought to launch an all-out effort.
Let me just pose the question a little bit differently, because as I said, we're not going to have a great deal of time tonight to talk about it. There is there not, Mr. Friedman, just a tremendous desire on our part. You talk about, the intellectual agnostic, but there is a tremendous desire on our part to believe in the existence of some extraterrestrial.
I don't think that's the case at all, Ted. I've lectured at over 500 colleges, I suppose. All the polls, the opinion polls, which the media depends so heavily on in other matters, have shown not only that most people believe in flying saucers, but that the greater the education, the more likely to believe in flying saucers.
Let me just add, because we're going to have to take a break. I was looking at some similar polls, and, the same polls also show that 42% of the American public believe in communication with the dead. Maybe.
Does that vary
knows,
with education in the same way?
I believe it does, but let's take a break and we'll continue our conversation in just a moment.
My commentary for the intermission is that this Nightline presentation aired on 24 June 1987. That's the anniversary of the Kenneth Arnold disc sighting, inspiration for the Seattle Space Needle. Apparently, ABC obeyed skeptic Phil Klass and found Stanton Friedman far more credible. So just prior to John Ritter's 1987 UFO film about humans poisoning the water on planet Earth, ABC delivered one of the best ever promotional campaigns in network history. Don't take my word for it. See it for yourself.
I got the job and I'm not living in my car anymore.
I do believe something's happening to you and me. Something's happening on ABC.
Thank you very much.
Note the analog ghost of John Ritter.
Continuing our conversation now with Stanton Friedman and Phil Klass. Mr. Friedman, help me again. One thing. Was it the hieroglyphics that you're most impressed with? That 5 people come back with similar hieroglyphics?
No, what's most impressive, Ted, is the similarity of evidence from around the world from so many people whose testimony you'd accept on anything else. That's what's so impressive. We're
Like
not dealing
what?
with one case or 10 cases.
What testimony are we talking about now?
We're talking about, for example, the description of a pilot with another pilot behind him in another plane, watching an object moving across in front of him with a guy on the ground watching them, watching the object move at what he estimates at 1,000 miles an hour in 3 seconds, reverse his speed, go a short distance in the sky, and do it again and again. That kind of case occurs all the time. There's an enormous volume of data that the skeptics refuse to consider. Mr. Klass, for example, in 3 books, doesn't even mention the largest study ever done about flying saucers because the data in it clearly contradict the pronouncements that he makes.
I'll tell you what, make it easy on me again, Mr. Klass. The object that was moving at an apparent speed of 1,000 miles an hour
Ted,
versus...
I cannot identify it off the top of my head. All I can say is that in your 7-minute intro here, there were any number of those cases that have been explained. Several of the photos were hoaxes.
Okay, but before we run out of time here, what we're dealing with, and again, that's why the public, I think, gloms onto this as much as it does. Here we have a couple of pilots. I mean, these are experienced observers, especially about things like that. Doesn't that cause you to wonder just a little bit?
No, it doesn't, because the late Dr. J. Allen Hynek did an analysis of pilot reports in the Air Force files and found that in terms of misidentifying prosaic objects like stars and balloons, that pilots, military and airline pilots, were no better than ordinary civilians. Being a pilot does not improve your powers of perception.
All right. Let me just ask one last question, Mr. Friedman. In your convention here this week, what is it you're seeking to do most of all? I mean, just
We're seeking to exchange
stories?
information, present new information. I'll be dealing with, for example, considerable evidence that one of the people on that Majestic 12 panel, who shouldn't have been there, he was a skeptic, turns out to have been connected on the inside with major intelligence agencies in ways that nobody knew before, which make his appearance on that panel quite sensible rather than the ridiculous notion it seemed at first blush.
Here, Stanton Friedman is talking about Harvard astronomer and aggressive UFO skeptic Donald Menzel. Menzel was a lieutenant commander during World War II, whose talents in cryptanalysis were readily put to use with a top-secret ultra clearance. The ultra compartment implied his awareness that the German and Japanese codes had been broken. He'd be an ideal government insider for discouraging widespread interest in the field.
We'll be covering the latest word from around the world on sightings and on abductions in particular, and looking at the scientific evidence dealing with flying saucers, and there's a great deal of it.
All right, before we drop the subject altogether, and we're going over a couple of minutes, Mr. Klass, just tell me about abductions. I mean, of all the things that are being discussed here, those really seem the most bizarre, don't they?
Well, Ted, I'm writing a book on this subject. It's already 2/3 the way through. It'll be completed shortly, be published early next year.
Just give me the conclusions.
The conclusion is, to quote President FDR, "We have nothing to fear but fear itself." Anyone who doesn't want to be abducted, who doesn't go here, I'll predict that you'll get 50 volunteers. They love to talk about themselves. Whitley Strieber, the most famous one, became a millionaire by writing a book about his alleged abductions. They're all fantasies.
Mr. Friedman, a final comment from you, and then we're going to wrap it up.
I think it's time we looked at
The actual data instead of making decisions.
via pronouncements and psychic understanding that Phil seems to show to explain away the data that he doesn't want to deal with. There is an enormous amount of information. Those who wish to reach an opinion on it should look at the information relevant to the problem.
Because you will not.
Find it in Mr. Klass's book.
Gentlemen, I thank you both.